I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've heard one question asked of me more times than I can count by my students, their parents, my colleagues, administrators, Bonnie Mwanda, the whole stakeholder continuum. What in the world are you doing? And usually, that question is precipitated by observing something I actually am doing in the classroom or in the hallway or meet the teacher night that by all standards of convention would be considered weird. For example, whenever I encounter a sleeping student or an auditorium full of tired dignitaries such as yourselves, I advocate that you stay awake by flapping your wings. Come on, flap. If you need to wake up, flap, flap. Don't be above it, flap. None of you has ever seen a sleeping bird fly. Now, if that sounds weird, that's okay, because it works. And therefore, I accept weird as a compliment. But I want you to remember something. It is better to be weird than forgotten. You see, weirdness has its own gravity for kids. It's open to wild interpretation and points them towards their imagination's horizon. It's risky and uncomfortable. But I find that my weirdness gives them permission to activate a state of healthy vulnerability that allows me to challenge them across multiple modalities. And it doesn't take long for my students to realize that they're going to explore ideas with me, that their mind's horizon really is the only limit in my classroom. One of my students, Caitlin C.B. Bailey, says, coming into Mr. King's room, you never knew what to expect, but you knew it was going to be enjoyable, unique, and engaging. Now, in order for me to let you understand what I do, I've got to first give you some insight into how my mind works. I am not, nor have I ever been, a linear thinker. I am an explorer, making connections across ideas and domains, roundabout and sideways sometimes. I am an unabashed lover of metaphor. My mind is a kaleidoscope, distilling new patterns and designs with each turn. This allows me to be solution-oriented, which empowers me to think creatively and divergently around the many problems I'm forced to face as an educator in the state of North Carolina. For example, this year our General Assembly passed Senate Bill 49, which says that if a student discloses a pronoun to me other than what is officially recorded, protocol is that I send that student immediately to a guidance counselor who will then receive explicit parental permission before that conversation can continue, full stop. And you all know that nothing builds rapport like a bureaucratic endeavor. Now, but hey, I'm a good sailor, and just like any other good English teacher, I simply set sail asking them for their prepositions. What are you above? What are you below? What are you with? What are you without? Now, don't tell anybody that. I don't want Senate Bill 50 to ban prepositions, okay? Now, I jest and bask in the shade of our duly elected officials' wisdom. But don't get me wrong. I understand that in education, there's plenty of need for linear thinking, systems, organizational patterns, and institutional fidelity. But outside of school, kids need to know how to think, to discern, to question, and to doubt the morass of information and noise currently saturating this age. And they deserve the full capacity of their minds if they're going to have to sort through this mess that we as their elders are leaving as our legacy on the earth, okay? Therefore, we must arm them with their creativity, their genius, their wisdom, and their unique perspective. So my creed as their teacher becomes to create a space where they can be both safe and vulnerable, empowered and powerful as they literally feel their capacity grow beyond room 1524. And so if you walk into my room, you're going to see a story of many stories, all given voice and agency to becoming the authors of their own story into learning and growth. Tonight, I'd like to share a mere smattering of the many weird techniques and methods I use to help my students reimagine themselves as learners, but also the learning process. I'd like to show you how I create a space where my kids can reimagine themselves in the learning process, a space that my student Addison Ferris says it's okay to mess up and okay to be flawed, because that is how we grow as a person. Now, nothing I'm going to share with you this evening is revolutionary, okay? I'm not doing this to chase clout or to set trends. But what I will tell you is that as weird as some of my techniques may be, they are grounded in psychology and information theory, gleaned from a lifetime of studying and observing human behavior and taking risks to arc my students toward growth, toward capacity building. And that becomes the raison d'etre of my classroom. Not simply to be a cog in a larger machine, but a capacity building system in and of itself. That begins on the very first day when I leverage those initial interactions with my students as anchors to tether them to a vision that they can buy into and begin moving forward immediately. Out the gate, I impress upon my students a narrative, a story of what their experience in my classroom is going to be. And I cannot overstate the importance of this step. The science is very clear about the power of narrative as one of, if not the most important vehicles of persuasion that there is. Not facts, not figures, not platitudes, not sound bites. If you want people to listen, empathize, buy in, and behave, you have to tell them a story that they want to believe, that they are willing or receptive to hearing. And the story I frame my classroom around is that of the archetypal hero's journey. And you all know that story, that of the diminutive individual becoming, of attaining one's potential against all odds. That's the heart of the American mythos. I mean, think about it. An underdog takes a risk and goes on a quest, and through sheer grit and determination, overcomes adversity to become, to attain success. Think Luke Skywalker, Katniss Everdeen, Beowulf, Frederick Douglass. This is all the same story, and it resonates across cultures and time, and especially among our young people today. And so I begin that shared story by telling them exactly where it's going to end. That every assignment, every task, every lesson is but one grueling step toward the summit of majestic Mount Capstone. That is the quest that will take them from lowly wise fool sophomores to collegiate level operators capable of questioning, understanding, evaluating, synthesizing, and transforming the world around them. Now, creating a culture like this is never a static process. It's always in motion, always dynamic. It's a frenetic, kinesthetic wave. I like to think of it kind of like playing a jazz piece, you know. It's a syncopated rhythm of constant renewal and reinforcement, adaptation and inflection, but nevertheless unified and deliberate in movement and in purpose. Now, I know that sounds a little abstract, and you may be concretely wondering what exactly a student may experience walking into this weird man's classroom. Well, I'd like to think a sensory smorgasbord. You see, I read Edward Bernays, and he said, visibility is the key to success. And so I manifest that aspect of his philosophy, both at the conscious and subconscious level. And so consciously, I may greet my students at the door with, Squealer the pig here, or this giant mosquito, or this here horse who currently serves as the Earl of Stool for a phone toilet, which has greater efficacy for confiscating devices from dopamine-addled teenagers than any phone jail you've ever heard of. But I digress. And so once they have crossed the threshold, they're then greeted by a buffet of educational propaganda posters curated from years of teaching Animal Farm that convey messages of encouragement or behavioral directives that I use to reinforce the culture of my class. Phrases such as, don't be sorry, be right. Or, I don't want your bad, I want your good. Or, boredom is the function of an inactive mind. Or, courage is what it takes to sit down. and listen. Then there are numerous paintings and artistic renderings given to me by students who have survived the experience, internalized the narrative, and who understand that this truly is a growth class. Finally, there are a multitude of little eyes scattered throughout the room. Green lizards and never dead donkeys, Miyazaki Kadamas and do better rocks, get good seats, squawking ravens, purple dragons and sunshine butterflies and quacking geese that might attack on Fridays. Now, in time, all of these creatures integrate themselves into my students, into my lessons, or my students' experiences within my class. One of my former students, Olivia O.P. Paul, said, there were mornings I would walk in with 5 hours of less of sleep, and Mr. King would come in, coffee and horse in hand, and I could not have been more excited. You see, this here horse and I have been teaching together for years. He is just as real in my class as I am. He has a voice. He speaks to my students. I'm the college board horse. I held that dictates, mandates, and frustrates. You see, I teach an AP seminar class created by College Board. And the problem I was having was that in the minds of my students and the emails of their parents, that monolithic educational institution and I were one and the same. And that is simply not the case. So I needed a way to disassociate from that entity. And the solution presented itself to me one day as I was sauntering about the North Carolina State Fairgrounds, smelling cooked corn and hot dogs. And I looked at a vendor's table, and this horse was looking at me. I said, how much? $1. And I said, sold, and made the single most cost-effective investment in my classroom ever. Because from that day forward, every single word I have ever read to my students that is curated by the AP College Board is read by that horse. And as weird as that was at first, and as weird as it still is today, it works. One of my students, Molly Dawson, says, the use of a stuffed horse facilitates communication in AP seminar and significantly alters the perspective of a rigorous course. The presence of the horse is a running joke, as it's the horse, not Mr. King, torturing us. As weird as it sounds, the horse increases the productivity of the students. End quote. You cannot argue with the horse's mouth. And that is to say nothing of the mosquito's proboscis. Okay? You see, a few years ago, I was teaching Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. And the idea of the Kafkaesque, which is to be trapped in an absurd system from which we cannot control or escape, is a little dense, okay? And they were having a little trouble understanding that. So I said, okay, let's pretend for a moment that this course, AP Capstone Seminar by College Board, has manifested itself in the form of a giant data-sucking mosquito. And every year, without fail, whenever they submit their official components to College Board for assessment, the mosquito appears and he hovers above their head and he gently whispers, give me your data. Give me your precious data, children. And as weird as that is, it works because the mosquito allowed my students to reimagine their experience in the rigorous course in relationship to that advanced literary concept, and they got it. Now, in all humility, I understand that on some days, my antics and characters in 1524 are trivial in comparison to what my students may be experiencing in life. And on those days, I need a more subtle way to remind them to keep their eyes on the prize of their own growth. And that's when I lean into that subconscious and I activate that panoply of posters I mentioned earlier through silence or even gesture. Now, speaking of gestures, I'd like you all to help me demonstrate the need for 3 of my posters, which serve as philosophical pillars in my classroom. I'm going to say 3 phrases to you. If you've heard a child say one of them, raise your hand. If you've heard a child say 2 of them, testify. And if you've heard all 3 phrases said by a child, can I get a Moanda? All right? I don't know. I can't. I don't care. All right. Exactly. That's what I thought. In my 20 years of experience, I have found that most people who use these phrases are using them as excuses to disengage from the processes that are necessary to learning and growth. And that is antithetical to what I do. My goal is to activate your potential, to activate your capacity, not let you deactivate yourself. So it's incumbent upon me to challenge those excuses, because the excuses you give yourself are the only excuse success needs to ignore you. So inevitably, when I hear, I don't know, I don't know is an excuse not to think. And thinking is exercise for your brain. And your brain is just like every other muscle in your body. If you exercise it, it gets stronger. It gains in mass. But if you don't exercise it, just like every other muscle in your body, it atrophies. It turns to jelly. And if you don't think as a young person, you may wake up as an adult with a jelly brain. And you don't want that. No. Then there's I can't. And I can't is an excuse not to act or do. And yes, you can. Yes, you can do everything I've asked you to do, because Mr. King is not in the business of the impossible. But if you use I can't as an excuse to disengage, you deprive yourself of the experiences that over the course of your life will give you fulfillment and enrichment. And if you reach the end of that course and look back on your life, you will realize there is something you can do, and that is die. And you do not want that weight on your soul at the end of your journey. Last, there's I don't care. And I don't care is an excuse to avoid the truth. And the truth is, right now, you might not care about me, this horse, this classroom, tomorrow, none of it. But the truth also is that the person you are in the future cares very dearly about everything you do right now, because you are a ball of neuroplastic clay. And every choice you make, every decision you make, molds that clay into the adult that you will one day be. And if you are not conscious and deliberate about what you think and do, you might wake up one day a formless adult child. And you don't want that to be where your story goes. Now, taken together, my posters and my imaginary friends, they simply serve as creative solutions that allow me to be both thermometer and thermostat, to gauge the temperature of my students and to make adjustments in real time when they are too hot or too cold toward learning that day. Beyond that, they serve as voices of wisdom and humor, reminders in perpetuity of our mutual growth story, but also my prerogative to add mass to their minds and value to their lives. Bottom line, I am in the business of showing young people what they can do, that they can reimagine themselves as the single greatest agent in their lives, in their quest to seek purpose, identity, faith, and wisdom. That's the meaning of life. I want to show them that they can do what so many adults obviously cannot, and that's hold in the field of their intellect, their biases, and their cognitive dissonances, and mitigate those inhibitors with the awesome, magnanimous power of their minds. Now, in closing, I'd like to say that it doesn't matter whether you embrace talking horses or flapping or posters or phone toilets. If what you're doing is coming from a place of authenticity, of genuine human compassion, then you can make all the difference in a child's life, even when you don't know it. I learned this lesson from that sunshine butterfly that I mentioned earlier. You see, during COVID and remote learning, we were all in different places of pain and loneliness. And this horse and I would get up each day and turn on a Google Meet, and we would teach class to turn off cameras and static avatars. And in all honesty, I didn't even know if anybody was listening, okay? But unbeknownst to me, one of my students was bearing a burden. And this is a burden that if you knew, it would break your heart. And we could find the strongest person here tonight, and you would not want to bear that burden. But at the end of that year, that student wrote me a letter, and she told me her story. She shared her story with me. And she said that every day she would get up and turn on her camera, And that little ray of sunshine is what kept her here on earth in the darkest time of her life. And I cherish that sentiment more than any I have ever received. That is my treasure, because it answered the question of what in the world am I doing? And no amount of legislation, no war on education can ever take that from a teacher like me. And if me being weird helped that young person persevere, then it's all valid and it's all worth it, because the earth needs young people like that with real courage and real grit. That's what's going to save us. That's what's going to save our nation. Not the ironic righteous indignation of those who would whitewash history or ban books or criminalize librarians or demonize educators. I say we have to go in the opposite direction of all that noise. And we have to reimagine this younger generation as a wellspring of insight into how to live and conduct ourselves. And so I challenge you, stakeholders across the continuum, ask yourself, what in the world are you doing to grab the attention of this younger generation and push them toward their destiny, especially in these Kafkaesque times where a person of decency and sensibility cannot distinguish reality from satire, where the performative nonsense of jelly-brained adult children sets the tone and tenor of our adult discourse. Now, meeting this challenge is going to mean accepting an uncomfortable story, an inversion of the generational wisdom paradigm. This is going to be weird for you to accept, grown folks, but we have a lot to learn from the kids, from young people. They can teach us so much, especially in regard to information processing, and they deserve our full faith in their capacity. When they have that faith, they flourish and they shine a light into this darkness. And they offer us way more hope than the incessant noise currently stifling our zeitgeist like a blaring off-key trumpet. And as the horn blows, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. A vision with wings, as Coach Barry would say. We are in the fourth turning. And as the pages of history turn on us, I pray you will heed my revelation, heed my vision, that the children are the best solution we have. Are you weird enough to be worth remembering to those who will inherit the earth? Thank you.